What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video with Tech and Navi, the summary ranges from LeetCode. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and start off by giving this a thumbs up. This is number 228, summary range. You're given a sorted unique integer array num. So first off, we're going to start talking about what sorted means. Sorted means that it's going to go into order, meaning that it's going to be ascending order, and then unique means that the values aren't going to be repeating. A range A to B is a set of all integers from A to B inclusive. Return the smallest sorted list of ranges that covers all the numbers in the array exactly. That is, each element of nums is covered by exactly one of the ranges, and there is no integer x such that x is one of the ranges but not in nums. Each range A and B in the list should be as output. A and B, so it looks like it's going to be a string if A does not equal B, and if and then a string, a single character, if A equals B. So reading off of this, I think it's very common that there's a lot of verbose language in here, and unless you see the input and output, it's gonna be really hard to conceptualize all this. So let's go ahead and break this down a little more. So we're essentially going to give in a value of ascending sorted unique numbers, and I mentioned what that is earlier, and it's going to be an array of values, integers specifically, actually. And for example, right here in example 1, a num starts off at 0, 1, 2, 4, 5, and 7. And then the output that they're looking for is 0 to 2, 4 to 5, and then 7. The explanations are that the ranges are from 0 to 2, which is this, and then 4 to 5, 4 to 5, and 7. So thinking off, when I originally approached this problem, I'm like, what are you guys trying to ask me to do? What it's essentially doing is that it wants you to take a list, and the list that's provided for us, and it wants you to find the incremental order that follows until the next value of, say, I, if we're iterating through nums, is not equal to that current value plus 1. And let me write this out a little bit so it's easier to understand. So let's say we have this list right here, nums, all right, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, correct? What we want to be able to do essentially is we want to have a way to determine whether or not the next value that comes preceding of the current value of I. So let's say we start on 0. We want to ensure that after 0, what comes after 0? 1. All right, and if you notice right here, the values are actually all they all happen to be integers. So that makes our lives a lot easier, because now all we have to do is essentially, if I can pseudocode this, we want to have a way to essentially check if nums at position I, all right, if nums at position I right here, this value equals 0, right? We want to see is if we add 1 to this value, so 0 plus 1 is 1, if it equals to the next preceding value. So nums at position I plus 1 equals what? 1. So, and then if nums at position I equals 0, and then we add 1 to it, so 1 does equal 1, so that means we're having a range. We're going to keep doing this until we get to a value that doesn't equal the current value plus 1. So if you see right here, we get 0. If we add 1 to it, what should we expect? 1. So that's a range. And then if we add 1 to 1, what do we expect? 2. So we're still in a range. And then you notice right here from 2 to 4, after 2, if we were to add 1 to 2 right there at index position 2, we should get the value at nums at index position 2 to be equal to 3. But we go 4. Okay, so now if we come right here, we can understand why they said the original value in this input is from 0 to 2, because that's one range. Because since we don't have the value 3 right here, that broke our range. So now that's just one range, 0 to 2, and we list that right here. It wants us to find every single range inside of the list, and it wants us to essentially show them. It wants us to essentially show what are the ranges that we have, and if there is no range for a value, as you can see the last one, 7 right here, then have that value, have that character, have that number be accentuated and appended to the list that we need to create, and that's expressed right here. So if A is alone, if A equals B, then we're going to essentially, and right here, if you notice right here, think about A as if the beginning starting of the position. So first, so think about, is this equals to A? pretend this is A, and then this is B. So that's how you should view A and B. The position that we are currently and the position that we are at the end. So I'm going to jump into some code. If this doesn't make sense, don't worry, I'm going to explain it more as we code, and it'll make a lot more sense. But first thing first, we want to have a way so that we can store our answer after we essentially parsed through and extrapolated everything that we're looking for. So we're going to have a value called answer, and this is going to be a list for us. And this list is going to be what we're going to append eventually all our values to. We're going to start off with a while loop, and then in this while loop, we're going to check for a couple things. First thing first, I'm going to write the part that I explained, and then we're going to have to add something to the beginning of the while loop. So we're going to do this a little differently. So we're going to start off by saying num's at position I. So we're going to start off with the current position, 0. So if num's at position I is equal to num's at position I plus 1 minus 1, then we found the correct value, because what's num's at position I plus 1 minus 1? So we essentially said if the first value, so if 0 is equal to 1 minus 1, 0, so if 0 is equal to 0, then that means we've had the correct iteration and it's going in ascending order. And if you notice right here, we can compare each value by just subtracting 1 from it. So for right here, if we subtract 1 from 2, we just get if 1 equals 1, and we can keep comparing the value as we iterate through it. This is our first condition. We also want to have a condition so that once we hit the end of the array, we're not going to get a list out of index position error. So we want to always check if I is less than the length of nums, and lums is exclusive, so it's going to be say if there's 6 values right here, it's going to be from 0 to 5. So if I is always less than the value of nums, length of nums, first make sure you check that. And if that current value is equal to the next value minus 1 and they're equal to the same, then we want to essentially iterate through I. So we can add 1 to it. And this is going to take us to the next I value, and we're storing I up there. So after we've done that, we want to essentially start to store whether or not we have the correct I position. So as I mentioned earlier, so we're going to have a first value, and we can set that to I, because we want to first store the starting position of our range before we go and traverse through it and mess up the value of I, right? So we want to have a value called first before we add I plus 1 to it if there is a range, so that as we traverse through it, we still have the starting position that we started off. Because think about it, if we have this massive list right here, and 0 to 2 is a range for us, right? And then we start traversing I, we lost the value of the starting position. So we need to have a way to hold on to that, so we're going to store that. And then we should also have an end value. And this end value should equal to the value of nums at position I. I forgot to add that here. Yeah, so we want our values to not be the indexes. I accidentally forgot to add the nums to it, but they have to be the values of I. So nums at position I, and then n is the position that we get after we've iterated through lines 8 and 9. So after we've done that, we also want to check if the value that we're on currently, so this condition right here is what we need to deal with now. Because if this condition isn't passed, then right, what are we going to do if we hit to the end of the value? Like for the first example, what if we hit 5 to 7 and we found the range right here, 4 to 5, and it finished. But after that fourth index position, there was only one more index position left, right? We're not going to be able to traverse through it. So that's why we checked right here. So this is not going to run. So we need to first check if essentially the first element that we are on, so if the beginning value, if the first element, and we set that right here, right? If the first element is equal to the last element, then that means that we didn't move at all, right? Because if we've iterated I, and then we set what I value is, then we should always be in charge of what the value of I is. And oops, I actually forgot to write the top while loop. So obviously we want to have an iteration. The first while loop is for the entire iteration through nums, and the second value was for edge cases if there was ranges. Without line 8, as we were going through it, obviously it's not Pythonic, wouldn't have made sense if we didn't have this, but first and end value would only exist if we have the first iteration of while, because at the end we're going to do something like this. We're going to have to iterate through I regardless, because this condition only executed if there is a range. And if there isn't a range, then we have to have the while loop still be able to traverse, right? So if the first value that in our range, in our value of nums, is the same as the last value, meaning that there's only one value, so example for the first one will be 7, then we want to append, and we can use f string, you can do quotations, you can do, you can cast it with a string. We're going to do f string right here. We're going to append the value of, what does it want us to do? It wants to append the value of first. So let's write first right here, and then it wants to dash greater than, and then end. So the value of end. Oh wait, no, value of end. Oopsies, that's for the next iteration. And then if there is more than one value and we've iterated through it and we did find a range, then we're going to do an else statement, and we're going to append first and end. And then after all that, we want to iterate our original while loop so that we don't get an infinite time complexity and then break our code right here. And then after that's all done, we want to return the value of answer. So this is what we did right here. Let's run it. What we did right here is that I is less than the value of length of nums, right? And since we're going through indexes, we want to do a subtract 1 at the end so we don't get an out of range error. But let's just run that and it should work now. All right, awesome. Okay, so cool. Let's go over this quickly. So answers is where we're going to put our values in. I starts off at 0. We're using while loop, so we have to increment it ourselves. We're going to always check if I is less than the value of length of nums. All right. And we check -1 right here. We do I is less than the value of length -1 because we have a edge case if it's the last value inside of the list right here. So the reason that this works, this is for the whole value of nums. We're going to be traversing through the whole value of nums in the first while condition. And then in the second while condition, we want to have a special edge case if we're on the last element and we haven't found a range yet. Because if the last element, and we haven't found a range yet, then we're going to have to use this edge case that we created so that we can append a single character value or a single integer value to it. And then we also check if nums at position I is equal to nums at position I plus 1, which essentially says take the index position of nums position I, which for example right here is 0, and then take the second one, which is 1, subtract 1 from the second one, which would give us the value of the first one. If that is true, then we have a range going and we want to keep adding 1 to I until we break this condition. After we've broken this condition, we want to save the last position that we were at nums I. This is the ending position if there was a range. And right here, we append all the values from the first where we started, because we had to save it before we started adding values to it, all the way to the last, and we do that in an f string. And then if this doesn't execute, that means that we have basically broken this first condition, and we are basically on the last element of the array. And then we do this, if first equals end, which basically checks if the first value is at nums I is equal to the last value at nums equal I, that means we're on the last element, and then we can just append the either the first, you can do first or you can do end, it doesn't really matter, but because they both are equal to the same. And then obviously we increment with I, and that will help us not get an infinite value, and then return the value. I hope this video was helpful. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I really do. Please, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them in the comment section. Like, comment, subscribe. Thank you guys so much, and have a great day.